Chapter 27. Cartagena. Having crossed the Caribbean in the teeth of contrary winds, it was not until the early days of April that the French fleet hove in sight of Cartagena, and M. de Rivarol summoned a council aboard his flagship to determine the method of assault. "It is of importance, messieurs," he told them, "that we take the city by surprise, not only before it can put itself into a state of defense, but before it can remove its treasures inland. I propose to land a force sufficient to achieve this to the north of the city tonight after dark." And he explained in detail the scheme upon which his wits had labored. He was heard respectfully and approvingly by his officers, scornfully by Captain Blood, and indifferently by the other buccaneer captains present. For it must be understood that Blood's refusal to attend councils had related only to those concerned with determining the nature of the enterprise to be undertaken. Captain Blood was the only one amongst them who knew exactly what lay ahead. 2 years ago, he had himself considered a raid upon the place, and he had actually made a survey of it in circumstances which he was presently to disclose. The Baron's proposal was one to be expected from a commander whose knowledge of Cartagena was only such as might be derived from maps. Geographically and strategically considered, it is a curious place. It stands almost 4 square, screened east and north by hills, and it may be said to face south upon the inner of 2 harbors by which it is normally approached. The entrance to the outer harbor, which is in reality a lagoon some 3 miles across, lies through a neck known as the Boca Chica, or Little Mouth, and defended by a fort. A long strip of densely wooded land to westward acts here as a natural breakwater, and as the inner harbor is approached, another strip of land thrusts across at right angles from the first, towards the mainland on the east. Just short of this, it ceases, leaving a deep but very narrow channel, a veritable gateway, into the secure and sheltered inner harbor. Another fort defends this second passage. East and north of Cartagena lies the mainland, which may be left out of account. But to the west and northwest, this city, so well guarded on every other side, lies directly open to the sea. It stands back beyond a half-mile of beach, and besides this and the stout walls which fortify it, would appear to have no other defenses. But those appearances are deceptive, and they had utterly deceived M. de Rivarol when he devised his plan. It remained for Captain Blood to explain the difficulties when M. de Rivarol informed him that the honor of opening the assault in the manner which he prescribed was to be accorded to the buccaneers. Captain Blood smiled sardonic appreciation of the honor reserved for his men. It was precisely what he would have expected. For the buccaneers, the dangers. For M. de Rivarol, the honor, glory, and profit of the enterprise. "It is an honor which I must decline," said he quite coldly. Wolverstone grunted approval, and Hagthorpe nodded. Iberville, who, as much as any of them, resented the superciliousness of his noble compatriot, never wavered in loyalty to Captain Blood. The French officers, there were 6 of them present, stared their haughty surprise at the buccaneer leader, whilst the Baron challengingly fired a question at him. "How? You decline it, sir? You decline to obey orders, do you say?" "I understood, Merle Baron, that you summoned us to deliberate upon the means to be adopted." "Then you understood amiss, M. le Capitaine. You are here to receive my commands. I have already deliberated, and I have decided. I hope you understand." "Oh, I understand," laughed Blood, "but I ask myself, do you?" And without giving the Baron time to set the angry question that was bubbling to his lips, he swept on. "You have deliberated, you say, and you have decided. But unless your decision rests upon a wish to destroy my buccaneers, you will alter it when I tell you something of which I have knowledge. This city of Cartagena looks very vulnerable on the northern side, all open to the sea as it apparently stands. Ask yourself, M. le Baron, how came the Spaniards who built it where it is to have been at such trouble to fortify it to the south, if from the north it is so easily assailable?" That gave M. de Rivarol pause. "The Spaniards," Blood pursued, "are not quite the fools you are supposing them. Let me tell you, messieurs, that 2 years ago I made a survey of Cartagena as a preliminary to raiding it. I came hither with some friendly trading Indians, myself disguised as an Indian, and in that guise I spent a week in the city and studied carefully all its approaches. On the side of the sea where it looks so temptingly open to assault, there is shoal water for over half a mile out, far enough out, I assure you, to ensure that no ship shall come within bombarding range of it. It is not safe to venture nearer land than 3/4 of a mile. But our landing will be effected in canoes and piraguas and open boats," cried an officer impatiently. "In the calmest season of the year, the surf will hinder any such operation. And you will also bear in mind that if landing were possible, as you are suggesting, that landing could not be covered by the ship's guns. In fact, it is the landing parties would be in danger from their own artillery. If the attack is made by night, as I propose, covering will be unnecessary. You should be ashore in force before the Spaniards are aware of the intent. You are assuming that Cartagena is a city of the blind, that at this very moment they are not conning our sails and asking themselves who we are and what we intend. But if they feel themselves secure from the north, as you suggest," cried the Baron impatiently, "that very security will lull them." "Perhaps, but, then, they are secure. Any attempt to land on this side is doomed to failure at the hands of nature." "Nevertheless, we make the attempt," said the obstinate Baron, whose haughtiness would not allow him to yield before his officers. "If you still choose to do so after what I have said, you are, of course, the person to decide. But I do not lead my men into fruitless danger. If I command you," the Baron was beginning, but Blood unceremoniously interrupted him. "Le Baron, when M. de Coucy engaged us on your behalf, it was as much on account of our knowledge and experience of this class of warfare as on account of our strength. I have placed my own knowledge and experience in this particular matter at your disposal. I will add that I abandoned my own project of raiding Cartagena, not being in sufficient strength at the time to force the entrance of the harbor, which is the only way into the city. The strength which you now command is ample for that purpose. But whilst we are doing that, the Spaniards will have time to remove great part of the wealth this city holds. We must take them by surprise." Captain Blood shrugged. "If this is a mere pirating raid, that, of course, is a prime consideration. It was with me. But if you are concerned to abate the pride of Spain and plant the lilies of France on the forts of this settlement, the loss of some treasure should not really weigh for much." M. de Rivarol bit his lip in chagrin. His gloomy eye smoldered as it considered the self-contained buccaneer. "But if I command you to go, to make the attempt?" he asked. "Answer me, monsieur, let us know once for all where we stand and who commands this expedition." "Positively, I find you tiresome," said Captain Blood, and he swung to M. de Coucy, who sat there gnawing his lip, intensely uncomfortable. "I appeal to you, monsieur, to justify me to the general." M. de Coucy started out of his gloomy abstraction. He cleared his throat. He was extremely nervous. In view of what Captain Blood has submitted— "Oh, to the devil with that," snapped Rivarol. "It seems that I am followed by poltroons." "Look you, le Capitaine, since you are afraid to undertake this thing, I will myself undertake it. The weather is calm, and I count upon making good my landing. If I do so, I shall have proved you wrong, and I shall have a word to say to you tomorrow which you may not like. I am being very generous with you, sir." He waved his hand regally. "You have leave to go." It was sheer obstinacy and empty pride that drove him, and he received the lesson he deserved. The fleet stood in during the afternoon to within a mile of the coast, and under cover of darkness 300 men, of whom 200 were Negroes, the whole of the Negro contingent having been pressed into the undertaking. were pulled away for the shore in the canoes, piraguas, and ships' boats. Rivarol's pride compelled him, however much he may have disliked the venture, to lead them in person. The first 6 boats were caught in the surf and pounded into fragments before their occupants could extricate themselves. The thunder of the breakers and the cries of the shipwrecked warned those who followed, and thereby saved them from sharing the same fate. By the Baron's urgent orders, they pulled away again out of danger and stood about to pick up such survivors as contrived to battle towards them. Close upon 50 lives were lost in the adventure, together with half a dozen boats stored with ammunition and light guns. The Baron went back to his flagship an infuriated, but by no means a wiser man. Wisdom, not even the pungent wisdom experience thrusts upon us, is not for such as M. de Rivarol. His anger embraced all things, but focused chiefly upon Captain Blood. In some warped process of reasoning, he held the buccaneer chiefly responsible for this misadventure. He went to bed considering furiously what he should say to Captain Blood upon the morrow. He was awakened at dawn by the rolling thunder of guns. Emerging upon the poop in nightcap and slippers, he beheld a sight that increased his unreasonable and unreasoning fury. The 4 buccaneer ships under canvas were going through extraordinary maneuver half a mile off the Boca Chica and little more than half a mile away from the remainder of the fleet, and from their flanks flame and smoke were belching each time they swung broadside to the great round fort that guarded that narrow entrance. The fort was returning the fire vigorously and viciously, but the buccaneers timed their broadsides with extraordinary judgment to catch the defending ordnance reloading. Then, as they drew the Spaniards' fire, they swung away again, not only taking care to be ever-moving targets, but, further, to present no more than bow or stern to the fort, their masts in line when the heaviest cannonades were to be expected. Gibbering and cursing, M. de Rivarol stood there and watched this action, so presumptuously undertaken by Blood on his own responsibility. The officers of the Victorieuse crowded round him, but it was not until M. de Coucy came to join the group that he opened the sluices of his rage, and M. de Coucy himself invited the deluge that now caught him. He had come up rubbing his hands and taking a proper satisfaction in the energy of the men whom he had enlisted. "Aha, M. de Rivarol," he laughed. "He understands his business, eh? This Captain Blood. He'll plant the lilies of France on that fort before breakfast." The Baron swung upon him snarling. "He understands his business, eh? His business, let me tell you, M. de Coucy, is to obey my orders, and I have not ordered this. Par l'amour Dieu, when this is over, I'll deal with him for his damned insubordination. Surely, M. le Baron, he will have justified it if he succeeds." Justified it? Ah, parbleu! Can a soldier ever justify acting without orders? He raved on furiously, his officers supporting him out of their detestation of Captain Blood. Meanwhile, the fight went merrily on. The fort was suffering badly, yet for all their maneuvering, the buccaneers were not escaping punishment. The starboard gunwale of the Atropos had been hammered into splinters, and a shot had caught her astern in the coach. The Elizabeth was badly battered about the forecastle, and the Arabella's maintop had been shot away, whilst towards the end of that engagement the Lachesis came reeling out of the fight with a shattered rudder, steering herself by sweeps. The absurd Baron's fierce eyes positively gleamed with satisfaction. "I pray heaven they may sink all his infernal ships," he cried in his frenzy. But heaven didn't hear him. Scarcely had he spoken than there was a terrific explosion, and half the fort went up in fragments. A lucky shot from the buccaneers had found the powder magazine. It may have been a couple of hours later, when Captain Blood, as spruce and cool as if he had just come from a levee, stepped upon the quarter-deck of the Victoriense to confront M. de Rivarol, still in bedgown and nightcap. "I have to report, M. le Baron, that we are in possession of the fort on Boca Chica. The standard of France is flying from what remains of its tower, and the way into the outer harbor is open to your fleet. M. de Rivarol was compelled to swallow his fury, though it choked him. The jubilation among his officers had been such that he could not continue as he had begun, yet his eyes were malevolent, his face pale with anger. "You are fortunate, M. Blood, that you succeeded," he said. "It would have gone very ill with you had you failed. Another time be so good as to await my orders, lest you should afterwards lack the justification which your good fortune has procured you this morning." Blood smiled with a flash of white teeth and bowed. "I shall be glad of your orders now, General, for pursuing our advantage. You realize that speed in striking is the first essential." Rivarol was left gaping a moment, absorbed in his ridiculous anger. He had considered nothing, but he made a quick recovery. "To my cabin, if you please," he commanded peremptorily, and was turning to lead the way, when Blood arrested him. "With submission, my general, we shall be better here. You behold there the scene of our coming action. It is spread before you like a map." He waved his hand towards the lagoon, the country flanking it, and the considerable city standing back from the beach. "If it is not a presumption in me to offer a suggestion—" He paused. M. de Rivarol looked at him sharply, suspecting irony. But the swarthy face was bland, the keen eyes steady. "Let us hear your suggestion," he consented. Blood pointed out the fort at the mouth of the inner harbor, which was just barely visible above the waving palms on the intervening tongue of land. He announced that its armament was less formidable than that of the outer fort, which they had reduced. But on the other hand, the passage was very much narrower than the Boca Chica, and before they could attempt to make it in any case, they must dispose of those defenses. He proposed that the French ships should enter the outer harbor and proceed at once to bombardment. Meanwhile, he would land 300 buccaneers and some artillery on the eastern side of the lagoon, beyond the fragrant garden islands dense with richly bearing fruit trees, and proceed simultaneously to storm the fort in the rear. Thus beset on both sides at once, and demoralized by the fate of the much stronger outer fort, he did not think the Spaniards would offer a very long resistance. Then it would be for M. de Rivarol to garrison the fort, whilst Captain Blood would sweep on with his men and seize the church of Nuestra Senora de la Pupa, plainly visible on its hill immediately eastward of the town. Not only did that eminence afford them a valuable and obvious strategic advantage, but it commanded the only road that led from Cartagena to the interior, and, once it were held, there would be no further question of the Spaniards attempting to remove the wealth of the city. That, to M. de Rivarol, was, as Captain Blood had judged that it would be, the crowning argument. Supercilious until that moment, and disposed for his own pride's sake to treat the buccaneer's suggestions with cavalier criticism, M. de Rivarol's manner suddenly changed. He became alert and brisk, went so far as tolerantly to commend Captain Blood's plan, and issued orders that action might be taken upon it at once. It is not necessary to follow that action step by step. Blunders on the part of the French marred its smooth execution, and the indifferent handling of their ships led to the sinking of 2 of them in the course of the afternoon by the fort's gunfire. But by evening, owing largely to the irresistible fury with which the buccaneers stormed the place from the landward side, the fort had surrendered. And before dusk, Blood and his men with some ordnance, hauled thither by mules, dominated the city from the heights of Nuestra Senora de la Pupa. At noon on the morrow, shorn of defenses and threatened with bombardment, Cartagena sent offers of surrender to M. de Rivarol. Swollen with pride by a victory for which he took the entire credit to himself, the Baron dictated his terms. He demanded that all public effects and office accounts be delivered up, that the merchants surrender all moneys and goods held by them for their correspondence. The inhabitants could choose whether they would remain in the city or depart. But those who went must first deliver up all their property, and those who elected to remain must surrender half and become the subjects of France. Religious houses and churches should be spared, but they must render accounts of all moneys and valuables in their possession. Cartagena agreed, having no choice in the matter, and on the next day, which was the 5th of April, M. de Rivarol entered the city and proclaimed it now a French colony, appointing M. de Cussy its governor. Thereafter he proceeded to the cathedral, where very properly a Te Deum was sung in honor of the conquest, this by way of grace, whereafter M. de Rivarol proceeded to devour the city. The only detail in which the French conquest of Cartagena differed from an ordinary buccaneering raid was that under the severest penalties no soldier was to enter the house of any inhabitant. But this apparent respect for the persons and property of the conquered was based in reality upon M. de Rivarol's anxiety lest a doubloon should be abstracted from all the wealth that was pouring into the treasury opened by the Baron in the name of the King of France. Once the golden stream had ceased, he removed all restrictions and left the city in prey to his men, who proceeded further to pillage it of that part of their property which the inhabitants who became French subjects had been assured should remain inviolate. The plunder was enormous. In the course of 4 days, over 100 mules laden with gold went out of the city and down to the boats waiting at the beach to convey the treasure aboard the ships. Chapter 28. The Honor of M. de Rivarol. During the capitulation, and for some time after, Captain Blood and the greater portion of his buccaneers had been at their post on the heights of Nuestra Señora de la Pupa, utterly in ignorance of what was taking place. Blood, although the man chiefly, if not solely, responsible for the swift reduction of the city, which was proving a veritable treasure house, was not even shown the consideration of being called to the council of officers which, with M. de Rivarol, determined the terms of the capitulation. This was a slight that, at another time, Captain Blood would not have borne for a moment. But at present, in his odd frame of mind and its divorcement from piracy, he was content to smile his utter contempt of the French general. Not so, however, his captains, and still less his men. Resentment smoldered amongst them for a while, to flame out violently at the end of that week in Cartagena. It was only by undertaking to voice their grievance to the Baron that their captain was able for the moment to pacify them. That done, he went at once in quest of M. de Rivarol. He found him in the offices which the Baron had set up in the town, with a staff of clerks to register the treasure brought in and to cast up the surrendered account books, with a view to ascertaining precisely what were the sums yet to be delivered up. The Baron sat there scrutinizing ledgers, like a city merchant, and checking figures to make sure that all was correct to the last peso. A choice occupation, this, for the general of the king's armies by sea and land. He looked up irritated by the interruption which Captain Blood's advent occasioned. M. le Baron, the latter greeted him. I must speak frankly, and you must suffer it. My men are on the point of mutiny. M. de Rivarol considered him with a faint lift of the eyebrows. Captain Blood, I, too, will speak frankly, and you, too, must suffer it. If there is a mutiny, you and your captains shall be held personally responsible. The mistake you make is in assuming with me the tone of an ally, whereas I have given you clearly to understand from the first that you are simply in the position of having accepted service under me. Your proper apprehension of that fact will save the waste of a deal of words. Blood contained himself with difficulty. One of these fine days, he felt, that for the sake of humanity he must slit the comb of this supercilious, arrogant cockerel. You may define our positions as you please, said he, but I'll remind you that the nature of a thing is not changed by the name you give it. I am concerned with facts, chiefly with the fact that we entered into definite articles with you. Those articles provide for a certain distribution of the spoil. My men demand it. They are not satisfied. Of what are they not satisfied? Demanded the Baron. Of your honesty, M. de Rivarol. A blow in the face could scarcely have taken the Frenchman more aback. He stiffened and drew himself up, his eyes blazing, his face of a deathly pallor. The clerks at the tables laid down their pens and awaited the explosion in a sort of terror. For a long moment there was silence. Then the great gentleman delivered himself in a voice of concentrated anger. "Do you really dare so much, you and the dirty thieves that follow you? God's blood! You shall answer to me for that word, though it entail a yet worse dishonor to meet you. Faugh!" "I will remind you," said Blood, "that I am speaking not for myself, but for my men. It is they who are not satisfied, they who threaten that unless satisfaction is afforded them, and promptly, they will take it." "Take it?" said Rivarol, trembling in his rage. "Let them attempt it, and—" "Now don't be rash. My men are within their rights, as you are aware. They demand to know when this sharing of the spoil is to take place, and when they are to receive the fifth for which their articles provide. God give me patience. How can we share the spoil before it has been completely gathered? My men have reason to believe that it is gathered, and, anyway, they view with mistrust that it should all be housed aboard your ships and remain in your possession. They say that hereafter there will be no ascertaining what the spoil really amounts to. But, name of heaven, I have kept books. They are there for all to see. They do not wish to see account books. Few of them can read. They want to view the treasure itself. They know, you compel me to be blunt, that the accounts have been falsified. Your books show the spoil of Cartagena to amount to some 10 million livres. The men know, and they are very skilled in these computations, that it exceeds the enormous total of 40 millions. They insist that the treasure itself be produced and weighed in their presence, as is the custom among the brethren of the coast. I know nothing of filibuster customs. The gentleman was disdainful, but you are learning quickly. What do you mean, you rogue? I am a leader of armies, not of plundering thieves. Oh, but of course, Blood's irony laughed in his eyes. Yet, whatever you may be, I warn you that unless you yield to a demand that I consider just and therefore uphold, you may look for trouble, and it would not surprise me if you never leave Cartagena at all, nor convey a single gold piece home to France. Ah, pardieu! Am I to understand that you are threatening me? Come, come, M. le Baron, I warn you of the trouble that a little prudence may avert. You do not know on what a volcano you are sitting. You do not know the ways of buccaneers. If you persist, Cartagena will be drenched in blood, and whatever the outcome, the King of France will not have been well served. That shifted the basis of the argument to less hostile ground. A while yet it continued, to be concluded at last by an ungracious undertaking from M. de Rivarol to submit to the demands of the buccaneers. He gave it with an extreme ill grace, and only because Blood made him realize at last that to withhold it longer would be dangerous. In an engagement he might conceivably defeat Blood's followers, but conceivably he might not. And even if he succeeded, the effort would be so costly to him in men that he might not thereafter find himself in sufficient strength to maintain his hold of what he had seized. The end of it all was that he gave a promise at once to make the necessary preparations, and if Captain Blood and his officers would wait upon him on board the Victorieuse tomorrow morning, the treasure should be produced, weighed in their presence, and their fifth share surrendered there and then into their own keeping. Among the buccaneers that night there was hilarity over the sudden abatement of M. de Rivarol's monstrous pride, but when the next dawn broke over Cartagena, they had the explanation of it. The only ships to be seen in the harbor were the Arabella and the Elizabeth riding at anchor, and the Atropos and the Lachesis careened on the beach for repair of the damage sustained in the bombardment. The French ships were gone. They had been quietly and secretly warped out of the harbor under cover of night, and 3 sails, faint and small on the horizon to westward, was all that remained to be seen of them. The absconding M. De Rivarol had gone off with the treasure, taking with him the troops and mariners he had brought from France. He had left behind him at Cartagena not only the empty-handed buccaneers whom he had swindled, but also de Cussy and the volunteers and Negroes from Hispaniola whom he had swindled no less. The two parties were fused into one by their common fury, and before the exhibition of it, the inhabitants of that ill-fated town were stricken with deeper terror than they had yet known since the coming of this expedition. Captain Blood alone kept his head, setting a curb upon his deep chagrin. He had promised himself that before parting from de Rivarol, he would present a reckoning for all the petty affronts and insults to which that unspeakable fellow, now proved a scoundrel, had subjected him. We must follow, he declared, follow and punish. At first that was the general cry. Then came the consideration that only 2 of the buccaneer ships were seaworthy, and these could not accommodate the whole force, particularly being at the moment indifferently victualled for a long voyage. The crews of the Lachesis and Atropos, and with them their captains, Wolverstone and Iberville, renounced the intention. After all, there would be a deal of treasure still hidden in Cartagena. They would remain behind to extort it whilst fitting their ships for sea. Let Blood and Hagthorpe and those who sailed with them do as they pleased. Then only did Blood realize the rashness of his proposal, and in attempting to draw back, he almost precipitated a battle between the two parties into which that same proposal had now divided the buccaneers. And meanwhile those French sails on the horizon were growing less and less. Blood was reduced to despair. If he went off now, heaven knew what would happen to the town, the temper of those whom he was leaving being what it was. Yet if he remained, it would simply mean that his own and Hagthorpe's crews would join in the Saturnalia and increase the hideousness of events now inevitable. Unable to reach a decision, his own men and Hagthorpe's took the matter off his hands, eager to give chase to Rivarol. Not only was a dastardly cheat to be punished, but an enormous treasure to be won by treating as an enemy this French commander who, himself, had so villainously broken the alliance. When Blood, torn as he was between conflicting considerations, still hesitated, they bore him almost by main force aboard the Arabella. Within an hour, the water casks at least replenished and stowed aboard, the Arabella and the Elizabeth put to sea upon that angry chase. When we were well at sea, and the Arabella's course was laid, writes Pitt in his log, I went to seek the captain, knowing him to be in great trouble of mind over these events. I found him sitting alone in his cabin, his head in his hands, torment in the eyes that stared straight before him, seeing nothing. "What now, Peter?" cried the young Somerset mariner. "Lord, man, what is there here to fret you? Surely it isn't the thought of Rivarol?" "No," said Blood thickly, and for once he was communicative. It may well be that he must vent the thing that oppressed him or be driven mad by it. And Pitt, after all, was his friend and loved him, and, so, a proper man for confidences. But if she knew, oh God, I had thought to have done with piracy, thought to have done with it forever, yet here have I been committed by this scoundrel to the worst piracy that ever I was guilty of. Think of Cartagena. Think of the hell those devils will be making of it now, and I must have that on my soul. Nay, Peter, it isn't on your soul, but on Rivarol's. It is that dirty thief who has brought all this about. What could you have done to prevent it? I would have stayed if it could have availed. It could not, and you know it, so why repine? There is more than that to it, groaned Blood. What now? What remains? Loyal service with the English was made impossible for me. Loyal service with France has led to this, and that is equally impossible hereafter. What to live clean, I believe the only thing is to go and offer my sword to the King of Spain. But something remained, the last thing that he could have expected, something towards which they were rapidly sailing over the tropical sunlit sea. All this, against which he now inveighed so bitterly, was but a necessary stage in the shaping of his odd destiny. Setting a course for Hispaniola, since they judged that thither must Rivarol go to refit before attempting to cross to France, the Arabella and the Elizabeth plowed briskly northward with a moderately favorable wind for 2 days and nights without ever catching a glimpse of their quarry. The third dawn brought with it a haze which circumscribed their range of vision to something between 2 and 3 miles and deepened their growing vexation and their apprehension that M. de Rivarol might escape them altogether. Their position then, according to Pitt's log, was approximately 75 degrees 30 minutes west longitude by 17 degrees 45 minutes north latitude, so that they had Jamaica on their larboard beam some 30 miles to westward, and, indeed, away to the northwest, faintly visible as a bank of clouds, appeared the great ridge of the Blue Mountains, whose peaks were thrust into the clear upper air above the low-lying haze. The wind, to which they were sailing very close, was westerly, and it bore to their ears a booming sound, which in less experienced ears might have passed for the breaking of surf upon a lee shore. "Guns," said Pitt, who stood with Blood upon the quarter-deck. Blood nodded, listening. 10 miles away, perhaps 15, somewhere off Port Royal, I should judge, Pitt added. Then he looked at his captain. "Does it concern us?" he asked. Guns off Port Royal, that should argue Colonel Bishop at work. And against whom should he be in action, but against friends of ours? I think it may concern us. Anyway, we'll stand in to investigate. Bid them put the helm over. Close hauled, they tacked aweather, guided by the sound of combat, which grew in volume and definition as they approached it. Thus, for an hour, perhaps. Then, as, telescope to his eye, Blood raked the haze, expecting at any moment to behold the battling ships, the guns abruptly ceased. They held to their course, nevertheless, with all hands on deck, eagerly, anxiously scanning the sea ahead. And presently an object loomed into view, which soon defined itself for a great ship on fire. As the Arabella, with the Elizabeth following closely, raced nearer on their northwesterly tack, the outlines of the blazing vessel grew clearer. Presently her masts stood out sharp and black above the smoke and flames, and through his telescope Blood made out plainly the pennon of St. George fluttering from her maintop. "An English ship!" he cried. He scanned the seas for the Conqueror, in the battle of which this grim evidence was added to that of the sounds they had heard, and when, at last, as they drew closer to the doomed vessel, they made out the shadowy outlines of 3 tall ships, some 3 or 4 miles away, standing in toward Port Royal, the first and natural assumption was that these ships must belong to the Jamaica fleet, and that the burning vessel was a defeated buccaneer. And because of this, they sped on to pick up the 3 boats that were standing away from the blazing hulk. But Pitt, who through the telescope was examining the receding squadron, observed things apparent only to the eye of the trained mariner, and made the incredible announcement that the largest of these 3 vessels was Rivarol's Victoriose. They took in sail and hove to as they came up with the drifting boats, laden to capacity with survivors, and there were others adrift on some of the spars and wreckage with which the sea was strewn, who must be rescued. Chapter 29. The Service of King William. One of the boats bumped alongside the Arabella, and up the entrance ladder came first a slight, spruce little gentleman in a coat of mulberry satin laced with gold, whose wizened, yellow, rather peevish face was framed in a heavy black periwig. His modish and costly apparel had nowise suffered by the adventure through which he had passed, and he carried himself with the easy assurance of a man of rank. Here, quite clearly, was no buccaneer. He was closely followed by one who in every particular, save that of age, was his physical opposite, corpulent in a brawny, vigorous way, with a full, round, weather-beaten face whose mouth was humorous and whose eyes were blue and twinkling. He was well dressed without fripperies, and bore with him an air of vigorous authority. As the little man stepped from the ladder into the waist, whither Captain Blood had gone to receive him, his sharp, ferrety dark eyes swept the uncouth ranks of the assembled crew of the Arabella. "And where the devil may I be now?" he demanded irritably. "Are you English, or what the devil are you?" "Myself, I have the honor to be Irish, sir. My name is Blood, Captain Peter Blood, and this is my ship, the Arabella, all very much at your service." "Blood!" shrilled the little man. "Oh's Blood! A pirate!" He swung to the colossus who followed him. "A damned pirate, Vander Kylen. Rend my vitals, but we're come from Scylla to Charybdis." "So?" said the other gutturally, and again, "So?" Then the humor of it took him, and he yielded to it. "Damn, what's to laugh at, you porpoise?" spluttered Mulberry Coat. "A fine tale, this'll make it home. Admiral Vander Kylen first loses his fleet in the night, then has his flagship fired under him by a French squadron, and ends all by being captured by a pirate. I'm glad you find it matter for laughter. Since for my sins I happen to be with you, I'm damned if I do." "There's a misapprehension, if I may make so bold as to point it out," put in Blood quietly. "You are not captured, gentlemen. You are rescued. When you realize it, perhaps it will occur to you to acknowledge the hospitality I am offering you. It may be poor, but it is the best at my disposal." The fierce little gentleman stared at him. "Damn, do you permit yourself to be ironical?" He disapproved him, and possibly with a view to correcting any such tendency, proceeded to introduce himself. "I am Lord Willoughby, King William's Governor-General of the West Indies, and this is Admiral Vander Kylen, commander of His Majesty's West Indian fleet, at present mislaid somewhere in this damned Caribbean Sea." "King William?" quoth Blood, and he was conscious that Pitt and Dyke, who were behind him, now came edging nearer, sharing his own wonder. "And who may be King William, and of what may he be king?" "What's that?" In a wonder greater than his own, Lord Willoughby stared back at him. "At last, I am alluding to His Majesty King William III, William of Orange, who with Queen Mary has been ruling England for 2 months and more." There was a moment's silence, until Blood realized what he was being told. "D'ye mean, sir, that they've roused themselves at home, and kicked out that scoundrel James and his gang of ruffians?" Admiral Vander Kylen nudged his lordship, a humorous twinkle in his blue eyes. "His politics are fairy sound, I dink," he growled. His lordship's smile brought lines like gashes into his leathery cheeks. "Slife, hadn't you heard? Where the devil have you been at all?" "Out of touch with the world for the last 3 months, said Blood. "Stab me, you must have been. And in that 3 months the world has undergone some changes." Briefly, he added an account of them. King James was fled to France and living under the protection of King Louis, wherefore, and for other reasons, England had joined the league against her and was now at war with France. That was how it happened that the Dutch admiral's flagship had been attacked by M. de Rivarol's fleet that morning, from which it clearly followed that in his voyage from Cartagena the Frenchman must have spoken some ship that gave him the news. After that, with renewed assurances that aboard his ship they should be honorably entreated, Captain Blood led the Governor-General and the Admiral to his cabin, what time the work of rescue went on. The news he had received had set Blood's mind in a turmoil. If King James was dethroned and banished, there was an end to his own outlawry for his alleged share in an earlier attempt to drive out that tyrant. It became possible for him to return home and take up his life again at the point where it was so unfortunately interrupted 4 years ago. He was dazzled by the prospect so abruptly opened out to him. The thing so filled his mind, moved him so deeply, that he must afford it expression. In doing so, he revealed of himself more than he knew or intended to, the astute little gentleman who watched him so keenly the while. "Go home, if you will," said his lordship when Blood paused. "You may be sure that none will harass you on the score of your piracy, considering what it was that drove you to it. But why be in haste? We have heard of you, to be sure, and we know of what you are capable upon the seas. Here is a great chance for you, since you declare yourself sick of piracy. Should you choose to serve King William out here during this war, your knowledge of the West Indies should render you a very valuable servant to His Majesty's government, which you would not find ungrateful. You should consider it. Damn, sir, I repeat, it is a great chance you are given. That your lordship gives me, Blood amended, I am very grateful. But at the moment, I confess, I can consider nothing but this great news. It alters the shape of the world. I must accustom myself to view it as it now is before I can determine my own place in it. Pitt came in to report that the work of rescue was at an end, and the men picked up some 45 in all safe aboard the 2 buccaneer ships. He asked for orders. Blood rose. I am negligent of your lordship's concerns in my consideration of my own. You'll be wishing me to land you at Port Royal. At Port Royal? The little man squirmed wrathfully on his seat. Wrathfully, and at length, he informed Blood that they had put into Port Royal last evening to find its deputy governor absent. He had gone on some wild goose chase to Tortuga after buccaneers, taking the whole of the fleet with him. Blood stared in surprise a moment, then yielded to laughter. He went, I suppose, before news reached him of the change of government at home and the war with France? He did not, snapped Willoughby. He was informed of both, and also of my coming before he set out. Oh, impossible. So I should have thought. But I have the information from a Major Mallard whom I found in Port Royal, apparently governing in this fool's absence. But is he mad to leave his post at such a time? Blood was amazed. Taking the whole fleet with him, pray remember, and leaving the place open to French attack. That is the sort of deputy governor that the late government thought fit to appoint, an epitome of its misrule. Damn! He leaves Port Royal unguarded save by a ramshackle fort that can be reduced to rubble in an hour. Stab me! It's unbelievable. The lingering smile faded from Blood's face. Is Rivarol aware of this? He cried sharply. It was the Dutch admiral who answered him. Would he go there if he were not? M. de Rivarol, he takes some of our men prisoners. Berhabs they tell him, berhabs he make them tell, ide is a great opportunity. His lordship snarled like a mountain cat. That rascal bishop shall answer for it with his head if there's any mischief done through this desertion of his post. What if it were deliberate, eh? What if he is more knave than fool? What if this is his way of serving King James, from whom he held his office? Captain Blood was generous. Hardly so much, it was just vindictiveness that urged him. It's myself he's hunting at Tortuga, my lord, but I'm thinking that while he's about it, I'd best be looking after Jamaica for King William. He laughed, with more mirth than he had used in the last 2 months. Set a course for Port Royal, Jeremy, and make all speed. We'll be level yet with M. de Rivarol and wipe off some other scores at the same time. Both Lord Willoughby and the Admiral were on their feet. But you are not equal to it, damn, cried his lordship. Any one of the Frenchman's 3 ships is a match for both yours, my man. In guns. Aye, said Blood, and he smiled. But there's more than guns that matter in these affairs. If your lordship would like to see an action fought at sea as an action should be fought, this is your opportunity. Both stared at him. But the odds, his lordship insisted. It is impossible, said van der Kuylen, shaking his great head. Seamanship is important. Bud guns is guns. If I can't defeat him, I can sink my own ships in the Channel and block him in until Bishop gets back from his wild goose chase with his squadron, or until your own fleet turns up. And what good will that be, pray? Demanded Willoughby. I'll be after telling you. Rivarol is a fool to take this chance, considering what he's got aboard. He carried in his hold the treasure plundered from Cartagena, amounting to 40 million livres. They jumped at the mention of that colossal sum. He has gone into Port Royal with it. Whether he defeats me or not, he doesn't come out of Port Royal with it again, and sooner or later that treasure shall find its way into King William's coffers after, say, 1/5 share shall have been paid to my buccaneers. Is that agreed, Lord Willoughby?" His lordship stood up, and shaking back the cloud of lace from his wrist, held out a delicate white hand. "Captain Blood, I discover greatness in you," said he. "Sure, it's your lordship has the fine sight to perceive it," laughed the captain. Yes, but how will you do it?" growled Vanderkuylen. "Come on deck, and it's a demonstration I'll be giving you before the day's much older."